There's potential trouble down in the Bayou, but could that mean a good thing for the Heat? We'll break down the list regarding Pelican star Brandon Ingram and if he's a potential trade target for Miami on today's Locked On Heat.
You are Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome to Locked On Heat, your everyday podcast on the Miami Heat, whether you're tuning in on YouTube, Odyssey, or your favorite podcast app. Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. I'm Wes Goldberg, editor at allyoucanheat.com, here with David Ramil. Both of us are credentialed Heat media members, and the best way to support the show is to leave a 5-star rating and review on your podcast app and subscribe on YouTube. A reminder that now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a free 3-week trial of NFL Sunday Ticket on YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Big win for the Dolphins over the weekend. All fun stuff. We're going to talk about Jimmy Butler being quote-unquote fond of Brooklyn later in the show. But I want to start today by talking about Brandon Ingram, who didn't show up to a voluntary Pelicans minicamp last week, then posted a video on Instagram of a pastor speaking about the importance of staying away from environments where people don't know the true value of you. The Athletics' Will Gilroy then wrote for The Athletic, quote, based on how this offseason has gone, it's pretty clear that the rest of the league doesn't believe Ingram's value is as high as he thinks it is. He's one of the most talented forwards in the league, in the prime of his career, and he's being treated like a guy nobody wants, end quote. So one of the issues here is Brandon Ingram's contract. He's a free agent next summer. He reportedly wants a max deal, a max extension that's going to pay him more than $50 million a year. And that's sort of the hang-up here. Is I think everybody agrees that Brandon Ingram is very talented. I think the part that I guess the reason his market has been hurt right now is because nobody wants to pay him that kind of money. He's good. He's not that good. That said, he's still in limbo. It looks like he's trying to maybe force his way out of New Orleans by not going to this minicamp, by posting these cryptic kind of messages on social media and stuff. So my question to you, David, is should the Heat give the New Orleans Pelicans a call? Should the Heat want Brandon Ingram? What are your thoughts about him as a player and giving him a max and all this kind of stuff?
I think they should. I think there's a conversation that definitely should be had, and I think it's about managing expectations. And I think it shows a proper level of, maybe respect isn't the right word, but I think I think it's a good boost for a player to get a call and from a winning organization like the Heat to say there's interest there. We've heard players say this before. I know that they wanted me here. I feel like I'm wanted. You want to be in a place where you're wanted and respected. And given what Ingram posted on social media, it's clear that that's a priority for him. So I think while he might be appreciated in New Orleans, and that's not to say that he isn't, any team that takes that first cautionary step of trying to inquire whether Ingram is available or what they could be able to get him for, I think goes a long way towards showing him, look, they wanted me here, etc. And I think it's a good move to make. And I think you have to be able to also manage expectations from the player side and also from the team side and say, you know what, we'd love to have you here, but we cannot afford to pay you the kind of money that you're seeking.
So you don't you don't think he's a max player either then?
I don't know if I'd qualify him as a max player. I just think that given what the CBA has done to teams around the league and how restrictive it is, you have to be cautious. And you're already talking about the potential of trading Jimmy Butler or paying Jimmy Butler a lot of money. You've got Tyler making a hefty chunk of change. Bam, obviously, with his extension kicking in, there's a lot of money there being given out to these players. And while you'd love to be able to pay Ingram, you kind of have to just say, you know what, we're choosing not to pay you that much, but we'd love to have you for an incredibly high salary that will make up some of the cost of again, being in Florida, not having the state income tax. I think it all balances out.
If I could step in here, because I agree with everything you're saying, and I do think with the way the salary cap is structured now, if you're an NBA team, if you're the Pelicans, you've got Zion. He's your franchise player for better or for worse. You've kind of just everything's built around him now, and you've got to determine okay, the new salary cap, the way it works, we basically get 2 max guys. We just saw the Clippers say we had 3 max guys with James Harden, Kawhi Leonard, and Paul George, and we just couldn't afford all 3 of them. We got to let Paul George walk. We're picking Harden and Kawhi. And we can argue about whether or not that was the right decision or not, but that's what you can basically you can have 2 guys. And you use the word cautious, and I would say, like, if you're going to pay one player basically 30% of your cap, which is essentially what a max contract is, you better be sure that that guy could be one of the best 2 players on a championship team. And then if he's not, then what are you doing? Then you almost have to let him walk. And there was before the CBA kicked in, I used to call them easy max contracts. It was guys like Brandon Ingram, they just got him. Like, okay, we'll figure it out later. The luxury tax is not that punitive. Basically, it's just the owner that has to pay for it. But it doesn't come with all these team building restrictions. And even if this player is not worth the max, if he's worth 80% of the max, we could still make up for it by just spending more money in other places on the roster. Now, if your max player isn't worth 100% of the max and is only worth 80% of the max, you can only pay that player 80% of the max, right? Or else you're kind of behind the 8 ball and you're basically screwed from a team building perspective. Absolutely. And so I think players like Brandon Ingram, and I think Zach LaVine is seeing this too, by the way, they're going to be like this first test case of player in the new CBA that has to get, usually it was like middle class, minimum middle class max players. I think we're going to have a whole bracket of NBA player now that's more than middle class, like more than the mid-level exception, less than the max. And Brandon Ingram
Jimmy fits into that category.
Who?
Jimmy Butler.
Oh, yeah. I mean, maybe we just saw DeMar DeRozan do it, right? I mean, he's making like $20+ million with Sacramento, but as he gets older, that's sort of what you could pay these guys. That said, like Brandon Ingram, he's so talented, man. Like this guy, 6'8", so you love the length already. He averaged 23 points per game over the last 5 years. I've actually liked over the last couple of seasons the shades of playmaking. I think he's trending into being more of a playmaker than he's ever been in his career. He basically has averaged 23, 5, and 5 over the last 5 years. So there's a ton of talent here. And if you're a Heat team, bottom 10 in offense for the last 2 years, getting a guy like Brandon Ingram would be an upgrade. He would have been the Heat's leading scorer last year.
Oh yeah.
So that, like, all of that you like. The problem is that he hasn't played more than 64 games in a season since he's a rookie. Like, you talk about a team that is always hurt and probably overpays a lot of their guys. Brandon Ingram would enter there, and you would just be doubling down on all the problems you already have on a guy who's probably going to need to be overpaid and a guy who's always hurt. And I don't know if you're the Heat, that's the right player that you want to invest in, considering all the things we already talked about.
The injury concerns are problematic, and I think that's, you don't want to lose Jimmy, who's already got an injury concern or isn't always available for a number of games, and then replace him with another player who is going to be missing a certain number of games too. So that's definitely a concern, and I don't know how you can kind of wrap your mind around that. I don't know how you can accept that, because I think if you look at the players where they currently are right now, is Jimmy Butler a better player than Brandon Ingram?
Yeah,
I think the answer is still yes.
Yeah.
Not only because the production is comparable, the defense is higher, and at the same time, you get what you get from him at a playoff setting. And if that's the case, he's a significantly better player.
Well, let's also be let's be very clear about this. Jimmy Butler does like the winning player things. He does the little things that Brandon Ingram, frankly, does not do. Right? Like Brandon Ingram has not proven. Yeah, he doesn't. This guy's made the playoffs once in his career. This guy's won more than 41 games, I think, once in his career. I think I have that right.
Last year with New Orleans, I think it was 43 games. I think it was the statistic, but yeah, it was. He has not been part of winning programs for the duration of his career. Whether he's a bit part of that, or whether or not it was just the construction or the teams that he happened to be on. Like, I mean, he was drafted an early draft pick by the Lakers and traded in the Anthony Davis trade, and that New Orleans team wasn't ready to compete right away. So there have been reasons for that.
But the point is, like, if you're getting paid like close to max money, you better be that player who can drive winning. And he hasn't been. He's a good player, but he's not a max player who drives winning. That's what you pay those max players for, is they just lift you into winning.
But you wonder, given, again, the Lakers' dysfunction, the Pelicans' relative, maybe not dysfunction, but let's say lack of a true goal or purpose on an annual basis. And then you come to a team like Miami that has everything so clearly laid out and a clear understanding of hierarchy and what you're supposed to do, et cetera. And it's not to say that they can always transcend a lack of talent, but Ingram has never been known for having a lack of talent. Like, he's a great, talented player. and immediately he would be Miami's, I think, best scorer, like even better than Tyler by a wide margin. Like his ability to create a shot, given his length and everything else, it's pretty top tier. I know there are concerns about how he gets his scoring from the mid range and that sort.
Yeah, we'll talk. I want to talk about that in a second. Yeah, but continue. Yeah.
Overall, no, I just think if you have the opportunity to acquire a talented scorer in his prime and align him with Bam Adebayo and their future together, that's something to consider. And I'm a little surprised to hear that Miami wouldn't make a call or hasn't made a call yet, because I think it certainly would behoove them to do so.
Well, there's also a hidden benefit in trading for Brandon Ingram that I don't think anybody is talking about. I'll tell you what it is after this here on Locked On Heat.
Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel. Well, for a reason. It's America's #1 sportsbook, and we've got something a little different for you. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet just $5, and you get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Games yesterday, opening weekend, the NFL. What were you watching? I know you were probably watching the Dolphins game, of course, but
locked into the Dolphins, man. No, I mean, you poke around, you kind of see the updates on all the other teams. I watched a little bit of that Lions-Rams game on Sunday night, and then I turned it off right before it got good because it was really boring for a long time, and then apparently it went into overtime, I saw this morning. But the Dolphins have a quick turnaround here. Thursday night against the Buffalo Bills, they're hosting them, but I was surprised. I looked at the FanDuel line this morning. The Dolphins, 1.5-point favorites over Josh Allen and the Bills. I know they're at home, but the short turnaround, I didn't think the Dolphins looked awesome on Sunday. Did you?
No, they did not. No, they looked really shaky, clunky. Tail of two halves, as we were talking about before the show. It was very unusual. And yes, you could probably expect Tyreek Hill to have an even better game on Thursday if Tua is able to connect with him early and often.
FanDuel might know something we don't if they got them as a 1.5-point favorite. It's not a huge
I'm a little
favorite,
surprised.
I was just surprised. Yeah, I'm surprised that they were a favorite. Yeah, that has to be just short turnaround home field respect. Like that probably has nothing to do with the team. These Thursday night games are so hard to predict.
Yeah, they are. That's what makes them fun too. So maybe just maybe Miami has a chance, man. If you want a chance to watch more NFL games with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon at-a-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. And if that's not enough, FanDuel also has something special for our listeners just this weekend. Be sure to check out FanDuel's Profit Boost in the app and use it for FanDuel's Double Your Winnings for all Sunday, September. Pre-game moneyline bets. Profit Boost will be. Anyway, visit FanDuel.com and download America's #1 sportsbook. We'll be right back.
Thanks again for making Locked On Heat your first listen of the day. For your second listen, enjoy the Locked On NBA podcast. There's no offseason in the NBA, and Locked On NBA provides daily basketball analysis from national and local experts in 30 minutes or less. No one keeps you as informed and entertained as Locked On NBA, available on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We're less than a month away from training camps around the league opening up, from media days from around the NBA starting. So tune in to Locked On NBA, get refreshed, get caught up on everything else that's happening outside of the Miami Heat. But speaking of the Heat, trading for Brandon Ingram on an expiring contract. So I think there's stylistic concerns that you were kind of getting at before we went to break there, David, about, look, he takes a lot of mid-range shots. He does not put pressure on the rim. Yes, he would be the leading scorer on a points per game average that on the Heat last year, but in terms of what this team needs outside of just raw production, he doesn't exactly provide that. He's not providing spacing around Jimmy and Bam necessarily. He's not providing that rim pressure that this team has desperately needed for a couple of years now. I still think it would help the offense. But when you consider the investment that you would have to make into Brandon Ingram, do you think that I don't think he's never going to be a guy who's putting consistent pressure on the basket? That's just not his game. I think he could be a guy who spaces the floor more. He has had years where he shoots more threes than he doesn't. He does have the talent. It's not like Jimmy Butler or Bam, who have not shown at the NBA level that they can make threes.
You have to grow or evolve into this. Yeah. I mean,
he just needs to step out.
Seasons ago, he was averaging 6 attempts per game on 39% shooting. Like that's high volume, high percentage, perfect. It was his leading scorer. That was his highest points per game average of his career thus far. So it's tough to say. Like,
but if he hasn't done it around Zion, who is maybe the player who needs spacing more than anybody, it's like him and Giannis, then my concern would be, why hasn't he done, if he hasn't done it around Zion, would he ever do it? Or he just is like one of these guys who's like, I can, but I won't.
I think there's something there, maybe a little lack of understanding or unwillingness to change his game. But you look at him score, and I think it kind of feels, and I know the comp is an easy one to make because of the slight build or whatever, but it almost feels a little KD-ish, It's like he can get his shot off over anybody.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's not a shot that he sees that is available that is a bad shot to him. Like, it's, 2 seconds in the shot clock, let's go. 22 seconds in the shot, I can take this shot. I can make this shot. So that's why I don't think he feels he has to get to the rim. It's not like he does it 100%, but he's not like a high frequency, because more often than not, all it takes is a little step back and he's going to get that shot over everybody. I would wonder, I didn't have time to check him before today's show, but I wonder how many shots he's had blocked over the course of his career. I would wager not many. If the shot's not going to fall, it's not going to fall. But he can get to just outside the paint or near the restricted area, and he can just let it fly. And he thinks that shot's falling. And that's the whole thing with him, is he has that mentality, which is something that might help Miami, because you'd probably see a lot more quick shots being taken. So you probably see a lot quicker offense. And at this point in time, I think so many fans are desperate just to see the offense juiced up to a certain degree. I mean, he'd do it. That's 100% certain. I have no doubt. And you might say, oh, it's a lot of mid-range shots. Yeah, but if he's taking those mid-range shots within 5 seconds of possession, as opposed to dribble, swing, dribble back, pass to here, pass to there, and wind up taking that mid-range shot with 2 seconds left on the clock, that's the offense we've seen over the last 5 seasons, and it just hasn't been enough. So to me, I think I would bank on the offense being juiced enough with his presence, that if you can surround him with enough defensive-minded players and outside shooting, that you'll probably find an even better balance on offense than what you've had over the last few seasons.
So to answer your question, 47 shots blocked last year, 36 the year before that, 42 the year before that. For the record, that's not a lot. Okay, like Jimmy Butler had, for instance, 63 shots blocked last year, 53 the year before that, which is also not a lot. But Brandon Ingram, to your point, does not get a lot of. It's like half a blocked shot per game. So half of one of
and
his
considering
shots
the type of shots that he takes, considering the type of shots he takes and the frequency, I mean, he's a gunner.
And how generous the NBA is about handing out blocks. Like, you get that little Kyle Lowry swipe down, could sometimes count as a block. Like, that's not always necessarily a guy reaching you at your apex of your jumper. But look, I've always liked Brandon Ingram a little bit more than consensus. I think he gets a little bit of a bad reputation for being like a losing player or a bad big stats and bad team guy. I don't know. My thing is, like, I also don't think he's the player that you build around, right? Like, if you're bringing in Brandon Ingram and you're saying like, well, we'll put him in these lineups with spacing and all these guys, it's like, well, that's not a Heat lineup, because if you're putting him on the court with Bam and Jimmy, those aren't 2 non-floor spacers right off the bat. So I don't know. I think he would obviously move the needle, but the whole problem, the whole concern here, the question isn't whether or not Brandon Ingram would help. The question is Brandon Ingram worth it? Is he worth what you would give up? And is he worth paying this money to, which you might have to pay him? Because if you don't,
can I
go ahead.
I mean, sorry to interrupt here, but one question keeps bugging me here. It's not just even about the contract. What would the trade for him be like? Do you want to get into that nitty gritty of what that might be like? And are you talking about a team that would have to, like, would Miami have to trade Tyler, or would they have to trade Jimmy in order to acquire Ingram? Because my thoughts, it's probably that it would be Jimmy.
Well, if they think that Jimmy is leaving, then maybe that opens up that door. But you wouldn't, like, unless you know for sure as the front office, then you can't trade Jimmy for Brandon Ingram, because that's just making you worse. So
I know.
And you're still, and it's not like it would be one thing if it was like, oh, well, Brandon Ingram, he's 27 and he's got this long-term contract, but he doesn't, right? You're going to have to pay one of these guys a ton of money that you probably don't want to pay him in the first place. So that wouldn't make sense. No, my thought was that it would be Tyler Hero plus,
because he shares an agent with Tyler. Jeff Schwartz.
So there you go. So, I mean, Jeff Schwartz, it feels like he represents 40% of the league. But yeah, so there's a pretty good chance of that happening. But no, that was my thought. And you would have to, without getting into the nitty-gritty of it, probably get a third team involved, considering how close to the luxury tax both New Orleans and Miami is. So you'd have to find a third team to help take maybe some unwanted salary and facilitate the deal. All those things are possible if you're motivated and want to do it. Right. But it is a thing that you have to think about. And it's like, all right, is it worth jumping through all these hoops for Brandon Ingram, who still needs a new contract. The one thing I will say about this, what if you just did it and then didn't sign, and with the intention of not signing Brandon Ingram to a new contract? Because I understand Brandon Ingram's perspective now. Hey, I helped build this culture in New Orleans. I helped get us to being a playoff caliber. Why aren't you paying me? But if you're Brandon Ingram and you get traded elsewhere, then there is a little bit of humble pie that comes with that. And you say, you know what? Let me play this out because maybe I don't want to be here, whether it's Miami or wherever. Maybe it's like a Pascal Siakam situation last year where he wanted the extension from Toronto, got it traded to Indiana, and was like, all right, let's just play this out, see how it goes, then we'll deal with the new contract over the summer. I could see that happening for Brandon Ingram. You see it happen all the time. So you trade for him, and you say, well, let's just see how it goes. But if you traded Tyler Hero, for instance, and that long-term salary, and you still have Jimmy Butler potentially coming off the books next summer, you trade for Brandon Ingram and his expiring contract, you could potentially open up, if you're Miami, $50 to $60 million of cap space next summer. Because if Jimmy Butler opts out and then you're trading like a Tyler Hero, Terry Rozier, Duncan Robinson, one of those kind of contracts in a Brandon Ingram deal, and then you let Ingram walk and you just say, look, we're just going to let you go. Then the other version of this is, hey, maybe we maximize Jimmy Butler's window with Brandon Ingram this year. We still have 1 year of all these guys playing together. But then we go into next summer anticipating perhaps Jimmy Butler leaving anyway, opting out and leaving in free agency. If he were to just opt out and leave in free agency and no other roster changes were made, you still have Tyler and all these guys under contract, you're creating like $10 million worth of cap space. You're not creating max cap space if Jimmy Butler walks next summer. But if you were to make this Ingram deal and move one of those long-term deals, then you're opening up max cap space. And that gives you just more optionality in sort of rebuilding after Jimmy Butler leaves. So my question to you, David, is what if you just traded for Brandon Ingram with the intention of letting him walk perhaps? And then you say, well, now we're actually a player in free agency because we wouldn't be before. Think about that. We'll answer it on the other side of the break.
Today's episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. What's something you'd love to learn? A lot of people say, you know what, I want to learn a new language, or maybe you want to learn a new art and crafts, something else, or maybe you want to just take the time to get into reading new books that you haven't been able to. You know what? It's hard to make the time to learn new things as often as you like. Maybe it was something you've lost in childhood, because kids are always learning, they're always growing, but as adults, sometimes you tend to lose that curiosity. So if you're looking to reconnect with that sense of wonderment and curiosity about the world, well, guess what? Therapy can help. And because your back to school era can come at any age. If you're thinking of starting therapy, then give BetterHelp a try. I think we're at a point now where we can accept a therapist. There's no stigma attached to it. You just want some talk. And that's the whole thing about finding somebody as easily as you do with BetterHelp, because it's entirely online, designed to be convenient, it's flexible, and suited to your schedule. If for whatever reason you get matched to a therapist and you need to be able to change therapists because your schedule changes and maybe they can't meet your time, then guess what? You can do it in just a matter of seconds and at no additional charge to you. You just fill out a brief questionnaire and you'll get matched up with somebody right away. So if you want to rediscover your sense of curiosity, well, you can do that with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/LockedOnNBA and you get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. We'll be right back.
Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. If you're new to us on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. You can also follow us on your favorite podcast app. We got an update on Jamal Murray. We got something new on Jimmy Butler. But before we do that, your thoughts on what I proposed there. Trading for Brandon Ingram with the intention of perhaps letting him walk away, and then boom, now you're like what the Sixers were this summer. You've got max cap space to use on a free agent or somebody in a sign-and trade. It just gives you a little bit more flexibility.
I think that's the kind of move that makes a lot of sense too. I don't like it. I probably wouldn't do it myself, but because I feel like whatever you'd have to trade to get Ingram, and if of course you wind up losing Jimmy, you're set back, and it's about retooling your roster and finding the right players to take you to the next level or be part of that next era.
It's like you're instead of going down one great player in Jimmy Butler, you're going down three, right? Because whoever if you traded Tyler, you lose Ingram and you lose Jimmy. It does take you 3 steps back, but
right.
Go ahead.
So I would be, but at the same time, the idea of clearing the books, I'd have to see who's in next year's free agent class, how likely they are, if there's a connection to an agent there that maybe you can kind of work. and there's a lot of variables involved, but at the same time, it kind of does help you reset the table a little bit. I don't think that's where Miami wants to be necessarily, but I think they would consider the move at the very least. But
Well, you mentioned.
I still have
Go
a hard
ahead.
time. No, still have a hard time thinking that this trade would work unless you're trading Jimmy for Brandon Ingram, because I think then you just kind of minimize him even further. Again, like you mentioned before, there's a lot of young players there. They acquire CJ McCollum. There's people need the ball, and it takes away from what Ingram does best. Putting up the shot,
Mm-hmm.
getting his buckets. If you're bringing him onto this roster with Jimmy Butler, I don't think he's so dynamic a scorer that he's going to be able to take on some of that. He's going to be taking on that scoring lead easily and carrying you to another level of offensive production that we haven't seen yet. And I think with Jimmy being who Jimmy is, especially in playoff time, he's going to want the ball.
Yeah, it's
Well, he's
it's
not going to
not
defer a damn
right. It's
thing
not
to
a
Brandon Ingram.
clear on court fit. It's not, and that is with Jimmy Butler. And I don't think you can, like we already said, you can't trade Jimmy for Brandon Ingram unless you know for sure Jimmy's leaving, which of course the Heat don't. So that's why this
It's a tough one.
it's probably why it hasn't happened. But you
Yeah.
mentioned free agents maybe next summer. One guy who we know is not going to be available next summer is Jamal Murray. He signed a max extension with the Nuggets over the weekend, locking him up for another 4 years. Murray had been set to be a free agent next summer. We've talked about him as a potential Heat target. That is obviously now off the table. Good business by Denver to lock up the cornerstone part of their franchise along with Nikola Jokic. But if you're the Heat and you have a whiteboard somewhere in that front office, now you have to cross Jamal Murray's name off of that.
Right.
Anything on Jamal Murray before we move on to Jimmy Butler?
Interesting that he gets the money that he does, given his injury history. But I mean, you're kind of just building off of the title and the possibility of staying there. There's a comfort level of playing
The chemistry
alongside
with
Nikola.
Jokic.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
it makes a
The
lot
guy
of sense.
never made an All-Star game, never made All NBA, but getting paid the
That's
way
so
that Brandon
ridiculous.
Ingram wants to get paid, who has been an All-Star. Some of that is just because it's been so loaded at guard in the Western
Politics,
Conference for so
baby.
long, and a little bit of that. But you're paying for the chemistry. You're paying for the two-man game with Jokic and
Right.
Murray. You're not really paying for Murray, even though he's a good player. He's struggled in the playoffs and in the Olympics and stuff, but they obviously believe he'll be fine. All right, so we have an update on Jimmy Butler. So the New York Post, this is funny, David. So the New York Post reported earlier this month that Jimmy Butler, quote unquote, liked the Brooklyn Nets. But the New York Post updated that report over the weekend and said that Jimmy Butler is now, quote unquote, fond of the Brooklyn Nets. Here's the full report. Jimmy Butler is, quote unquote, fond of the Brooklyn Nets and is open to the team, sources told Brian Lewis of the New York Post. David, what do you think of Jimmy Butler going from liking Brooklyn to now being fond of Brooklyn? Is this big deal or no deal?
It's big deal. I think it's realistic. I think Jimmy's fond of being paid, and that's been pretty clear about what we've heard from him and everything that he's done throughout his career. He wants to get paid, and if he thinks that Brooklyn is a team that gets paid, that's going to pay him rather, then I'm sure 100% he'd do it. But I also think it would signify going to Brooklyn what people thought going to Miami was like 5 years ago, in terms of him just saying, you know what, I'm going to take this big paycheck. I would absolutely not do this if I was a Brooklyn Nets, because while he might add some legitimacy to your team right away, you're going to be paying a lot of money to a player who's not going to show up because there's nothing for him to fight for in Brooklyn. Like he pulls himself out of, whatever traction he feels over the course of the season so he can play playoff games for Miami. He's not going to do that for Brooklyn. So you're going to be paying him close to $60 million. I would not guess that he would play more than 50 games over the length of that contract, but he'd get paid and he'd retire. And I think that would effectively, given like everything we've seen from him and all his interests off the court and this is the life he lives, he's a bon vivant. He's just a guy who just loves the joy of life, right? And everything he does. Man, that guy's just going to go there, get his money and be like, see ya. I guess I didn't win a ring. I still feel fulfilled afterwards. He's going to be fine.
He's going to live in New York. And we know Jimmy Butler. Jimmy Butler loves New York. He'll open up a Big Face Coffee, brick and mortar. He's got that social media partnership with Van Leeuwen, the New York-based ice cream chain. So there's all that. The Nets do make sense, though. They have $80 million in cap space next year, potentially. So they can, to your point, give Jimmy Butler whatever money that he wants. And they could look at maybe what Houston did a couple summers ago, like, let's get Jimmy Butler and another guy, and then maybe we get one of these top 3 draft picks in what is supposed to be an awesome draft because we're tanking this year and we've positioned ourselves to get one of these guys. If we get, like, Cooper Flagg, Jimmy Butler, and veteran free agent Y over here, then maybe that's something that we could put together. Maybe they still have Dorian Finney-Smith or Cam Johnson. They still have Nick Claxton, who we all like as a center. And say maybe we could, in the East, we could compete for the play-in spot with that easily in the Eastern Conference.
I guess you're right.
You know what I mean? Like, we're not talking about title contender, but we could compete for the play-in. We could start building
We're
something.
We're debating whether or not Jimmy Butler can continue carrying the team in the playoffs, and that's with very little help. I mean, again, Cooper Flagg might be a real deal, but he's still going to be a rookie. I wouldn't expect him to be that kind of high-level contributor on a playoff team in Brooklyn right away.
Sure, but how many games do you have to win in the East to be a play-in team? 40?
Like 46 last year.
To be a play-in team? That's what the Heat were. Not like the 9th or 10th spot?
Oh, I suppose. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
In with 38, 39 wins.
Yeah. Like, you could maybe, like, so the Hawks were in there with 36 wins last year. Like, it doesn't take much. So I could see them maybe wanting to do that. Would I do it? No, I wouldn't. I would be trying to build the right way in Brooklyn but the Brooklyn for the longest time has gone the opposite. They've tried to take the shortcuts, right? The Kevin Garnett and Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving and James Harden, all that stuff. So it's right up Brooklyn's alley to do something like this. Whether or not Jimmy Butler is fond, like, is that a stronger emotion than like? Fond is definitely stronger than like, right?
I think so. And it involves like some kind of emotional attachment to it too. Because you like somebody. That's more casual to me. But you just say I'm fond of somebody.
Right.
This was
if you were talking to like a girl in the bar, you're like, hey, I like you. That's like, well, I like you too. You seem like a nice person.
Cool.
If I'm fond of you, that's like that's making a move.
This is Victorian era missives in the dark here. So I've grown rather fond of you, my dear. It's like, okay. I hope the Brooklyn guys feel the same way. You know what? Between everybody,
Jimmy Butler hitting on the Brooklyn Nets?
He might be. With all the sporting of the handlebar mustaches across Brooklyn. It's still the hipster capital of the world. They might be bringing back fondness in Brooklyn. Let's go. Let's go. Let's bring back fondness.
I do believe that if Jimmy Butler doesn't get the contract he wants from Miami, I am not ruling out the Brooklyn Nets at all because he is so fond. I don't think that he's fond of Barclays Center or the way the Nets run their organization.
He's fond of Brooklyn.
He loves New York City. He loves New York City. And the Knicks are not, all the moves they made, they are not capable of getting Jimmy Butler. So the other team in New York is Brooklyn. I am 100% positive Jimmy Butler would love to play in New York City. Now, I'm not reporting anything here and saying that Jimmy Butler is going to go to the Brooklyn Nets next year, but they have all of the cap space that Philadelphia had this summer. They might be a team that says, you know what, we're willing to deal with Jimmy Butler and however he ages throughout his career because we just need the notoriety. We're
Absolutely.
Brooklyn. We're the second class team in our own city and all these things. And so I wouldn't Clippers East. I wouldn't rule it out. That's what I'm saying. I am not ruling it out. And I think Brian Lewis is spot on here when he says you shouldn't rule it out. So it is something to monitor. But all I know is within 8 days, Jimmy Butler went from liking Brooklyn to being fond of Brooklyn. So I don't know, a month from now, is he going to be desperately in love with Brooklyn? Is he just going to be head over heels? Head over heels might be next.
I'm quite taken by you.
Quite taken. That'll do it for us today. Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Like, comment, and subscribe on YouTube. Follow us on your favorite podcast app.